So if you're joining us for this deep dive, you have handed us a really, really fascinating stack of sources. We're looking at intimacy that exists, well, structurally and emotionally beyond the couple. And it's a profound challenge, isn't it, to one of the deepest assumptions we have.
It really is a very deep cultural assumption.
Our mission today is pretty specific. We want to unpack this core contradiction we found in the sources, particularly in Jaime Hoerricks' work. And the question is this: how is it possible for multiplicity, for more than one deep, meaningful relationship to exist, and yet nothing thins out? We're diving into this idea of care as a non-finite resource. And we're focusing on a concept that I think really wraps it all up. Polyamory is Gestalt-Preserving Intimacy.
And I think it's just vital to start by admitting there's a strong current of resistance we all have to that idea. Our culture doesn't just suggest this. It actively enforces the idea that care, attention, connection, it's all finite. It's presented like a limited pool of resources, or maybe a pie of a specific size.
Right, the pie metaphor. It's always a pie.
It's always a pie. And the lesson is, if you take a slice and give it to someone else, you must have less for the first person. This whole expectation of scarcity, of mandatory subtraction, that's the foundation we have to deconstruct first.
Exactly. And that's why the actual lived experience, when it doesn't follow that scarcity model, feels so surprising. Not just to an observer, but sometimes even to the person living it.
Because we're so steeped in it.
We're so steeped in the conventional story of how depth and attention are supposed to work. So what are the key beliefs? What do the sources say we're taught that builds these invisible walls around our capacity?
They're very powerful invisible walls. The sources really detail 3 main beliefs, and they all lock together. First, that care has to be rationed. It's a zero-sum game.
Okay.
Second, that for something to be truly deep, it needs enclosure. A boundary, exclusivity, like you're building a little fort to protect it.
To keep the good stuff in.
Exactly. And third, that coherence, the feeling that your life makes sense, can only really be maintained by narrowing your scope.
So if you widen the scope, you're just asking for chaos.
You're inviting chaos, yes.
So in that standard story, multiplicity is always a problem. It's not just complex. It's seen as, fractional, broken.
Diluted. And if that resource is finite, the body and the mind, they have to start doing what the sources call the quiet work of subtraction.
That phrase, the quiet work of subtraction, that's so important. It describes this subconscious thing, right? A process that kicks in the second we assume scarcity.
Yes, the moment you assume it. Let's unpack this a little. If care is finite, you don't even have to consciously decide to pull back. Your internal system it starts adjusting to prevent what it sees as an inevitable collapse.
Okay, so could you give us an example? What does that quiet work actually look like for someone who's working from that assumption?
Sure. It shows up in a few ways. One is anticipatory anxiety. That feeling that enjoying a moment with person A means you're about to get judged or maybe feel this crushing guilt about the time you're not spending with person B.
So the subtraction is already built into the good moment.
It's already there. And another way it shows up is chronic relational scorekeeping. You start managing relationships not on presence, but on metrics minutes spent, favors owed, how fast a text gets a reply.
You become a resource manager.
The resource manager, not a participant. And the assumption is always there, underneath. If this new connection matters, then I must be weakening something that already exists.
That fear, that structural fear that you have to matter less to one person to matter more to another, that's got to be an enormous cognitive load.
It is. It forces the nervous system into this state of a low-grade scarcity alert. Your body is just constantly bracing for the cost of adding something new. But the sources show that the lived experience of this non-subtractive intimacy can tell a completely different story. And this is really the pivot point in our deep dive today.
This is where we move from the sociology of it to maybe the structural psychology. Let's get into that different story, because this is where we leave the old narrative behind and step into what's described as a non-collapsing atmosphere. The sources talk about this state where multiple deep relationships exist at the same time, and the emotional environment, the atmosphere, it just doesn't collapse.
It holds.
It holds. There's no frantic feeling of overflow, no abundance spilling past capacity, just continuity. The internal rhythm, your stability, it stays consistent even when you add complexity.
And what's so fascinating here is the mental shift this requires. We are so trained to use that metaphor of dividing one pie, but the sources argue that in this non-collapsing intimacy, you're not dealing with one shared resource at all.
So what are you dealing with?
You're dealing with separate, whole things. Each connection is its own entire whole. It's defined by its own value, not by how it relates to the others. Think of it less like dividing a calendar and more like, I don't know, listening to a complex piece of music. Each instrument, each relationship is playing its own complete part, and it doesn't compete.
Wait, I have to push back on that a little on the practical level.
Mm.
Nothing competes.
Yeah.
That sounds, well, a little idealistic. Time and energy are finite, right? They're only 24 hours in a day. How do the sources handle that logistical reality of competition for, say, bandwidth?
That's a crucial question. And the argument they make is that the competition we feel is driven primarily by the scarcity mindset, not by actual time constraints.
Okay.
When you think care is finite, the relationships are forced to compete for validation from that limited pool. But in a Gestalt-preserving model, the very definition of the relationship protects it. Each connection has its own unique weight, its own distinct tone, its own way of being entered. Because their integrity is autonomous, nothing has to scramble for priority. If connection A is built on, say, quiet intellectual debate and connection B is built on adventurous travel, they aren't trying to draw from the same well. They occupy their own unique spaces.
That insight changes everything. If the relationships don't compete because they each have their own integrity, the whole system suddenly feels incredibly stable. It makes the shift from scarcity to expansion feel less like chaos and more like what you said, a structural calibration.
Exactly. Structural calibration.
And that brings us right to the heart of this deep dive, this concept of Gestalt-Preserving Intimacy. This is the term that gives us a framework for understanding how all these many wholes can maintain their integrity.
This really is the aha moment. If you look at the philosophy, Gestalt is the idea that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. But in psychology, it also suggests that the whole maintains its structure even when you add new things, as long as they're integrated in a non-subtractive way.
Okay, so Gestalt-preserving.
So Gestalt-preserving intimacy means the intimacy actively preserves the distinct wholes of all the connections at the same time, instead of breaking them down into fractions. It's an arrangement where adding a new connection doesn't mean you have to dismantle or thin out an existing one to make room.
So how does the body, I mean, your actual physical and psychological self, how does it register this difference compared to that scarcity alert we were talking about earlier?
What's fascinating here is the sources argue the body recognizes this state immediately. It's like an instantaneous internal recognition of safety and coherence. When that feeling of preservation is there, the body stays steady, oriented, and intact.
No scrambling.
No scrambling. And that's the key difference. There's an absence of that acute stress response we associate with loss. The nervous system doesn't get that fight or flight trigger that happens when we're afraid our resources are being drained.
So it's not just a philosophical state. It's a measurable drop in that anxiety. The body isn't pumping out cortisol because it's not bracing for
depletion.
Yeah.
Or anticipating relational fracture. It trusts the structure.
And that has to be the ultimate feeling of non-loss, the sources describe. No stretching, no dilution, and this is the big one. No sense that attention has been siphoned away from somewhere it belonged.
Yes.
That fear of siphoning, that's just the residue, isn't it, of the scarcity mindset.
It is the fear of scarcity talking. And when that fear is gone, the internal experience is just one of continuity. You're not forced to keep score of who got what. You're just present. And that presence is defined by the unique tone of the connection you're in at that moment.
This is where we see the division is cultural, not biological.
Right. We're conditioned to measure and to fear leakage and to manage our output. But when you set that conditioning aside, the body's perfectly capable of handling complexity without collapsing. The structure ensures the integrity of each connection is, well, it's self-sustaining.
And this allows for what the sources call many wholes, not broken parts.
Yeah.
It reframes the whole conversation away from relational math, how do I divide myself up, and toward relational philosophy, how do I allow these independent, complete structures to coexist?
Precisely. The essential insight here is that care, at its core, isn't a finite resource that shrinks when you share it. It's an emotional capacity that actually expands through its use. The more structurally sound whole relationships you have, the more resilient your overall capacity for connection becomes.
Many wholes, not broken parts. That's a powerful summary. This deep dive really suggests that when we stop seeing care as finite, intimacy can be maintained in multiple connections without that division, without that required subtraction.
This whole paradigm shift.
So here's the final provocative thought we want to leave you with, connecting this very personal idea to your wider world. If the body knows and recognizes this non-subtractive, gestalt-preserving care in romantic contexts, if it registers that absence of panic when integrity is maintained, how might this challenge our assumptions about scarcity everywhere else in our lives?
That's the question to sit with.
Yeah. Think about your friendships, your work collaborations, your community involvement. Where are you imposing a narrative of subtraction on your own time and energy, constantly fearing depletion or collapse? Perhaps that capacity for growth, for expansion, is fundamentally nonlinear. And maybe that core belief system is worth revisiting and perhaps retesting. We hope this deep dive gave you something powerful to chew on.